What's up, everybody? Welcome to Studio Source. My name is JJ, also known as Vatillas and Velcro. I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit about myself. I was born in New York to Dominican parents, and I grew up in New Jersey, small town called Weehawken. And I've also been raised here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I live now. I'm a full-time DJ, music producer, and studio engineer. And my musical journey has come a pretty long way since I was little. And as I was making my way through it, I always thought to myself, how did I get to this point? What made me be so deeply involved in music? And it wasn't until I got older that I kind of, really started thinking back really deep, like, how did I get here? Or why did I get here? And I think the oldest memory I have of me getting started in music was when I was maybe probably 8 or 9, 10 years old. I remember myself being in the kitchen, banging on pots and pans, with wooden spoons and metal forks and knives and all these different kitchen utensils and stuff like that. And as I got older into high school, my older cousins were all in the marching band. And in my town in New Jersey, in Weehawken, New Jersey, marching band was a pretty popular thing. It wasn't looked as like, oh my God, you're a geek or you're a dweeb or you're a lame person if you're in marching band, because, the Northeast is very competitive when it comes to, band and drum corps and things of that sort. So my older cousins were in marching band, and I really wanted to play drums, snare drum to be specific. I went to the music teacher at the time, his name was Mr. Espinoza. I said, Mr. Espinoza, I want to play drums. And the first thing he did was handed me a trumpet. And I said, man, I don't think this is for me, but I'm gonna try real quick. At that time, I wasn't old enough to be in the marching band, but they kind of groom you before you're eligible to kind of get you started. So I go home with the trumpet, I try it out, I said, this is not for me. This is not for me, this is not gonna work. I go back and I said, look, I wanna play snare drum. So on my free time after school, he allowed me to go up to the music room and just play the snare drums they had. As time went by, I gained his trust, and he allowed me to play snare drum. And I did that through most of high school until I moved to Atlanta. And throughout these years, I have been listening to a lot of different music, and still to this day, I like a lot of different genres of music. I was listening to very heavy rock, I was listening to hip hop, I was a big Jay-Z fan when I was younger. When I would go back home to Santo Domingo, I would hear bachata, merengue, salsa, reggaeton, a lot of Latin music. So my musical palette was very wide. I really like and enjoy listening to everything. It just kept things fresh for me. When I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, at the time, the only Southern music I had heard on the radio up north was, Ludacris. That's the only real big Southern artist at the time that was making waves up north. So I'll never forget, I was walking through the hallway and, I saw a new friend of mine that I had been talked to, because I was new in the school. And he was like, do you fuck with 3-6? And I was just like, 3-6? He's like, yeah, 3-6 Mafia. And I was like, I don't know, I'm gonna check it out. So I look it up when I get home, because, I was fortunate enough to have a computer at home and have access to LimeWire and Kazaa and Napster and all that shit to download illegal music. And so I look up 3-6 Mafia and I hear this music that I never knew existed and I never heard before. And after that, I found out about Crime Mob, and I'm hearing these quickly paced hi-hat patterns and this very up-paced gangster music. And I was like, this is pretty dope, you know what I mean? So as time goes on, I'm still very interested in playing drums. I didn't really like the marching band in that school that I was going to when I moved here. So, I was able to convince my parents to buy me a drum set because that was the way I could get my musical fix at home and, really express myself somehow. I get a drum set, I joined a rock drum band. I was very young at the time. I was 16, 17. I didn't drive. Everybody knows when you're from another state and you move to Atlanta and you have to drive everywhere, it's like, wow, it feels like such a burden. And, I'm coming from a place in New York and New Jersey where we would walk everywhere. We would take the bus everywhere. We would take the train everywhere. Not that many people had cars. Once you kind of got out of high school. So boom, I get a drum set, time goes on, I kind of, not that I get uninterested, but, I graduate from high school, I'm going to college, my time is different. I'm working at Mellow Mushroom, it's my first job ever, I'm washing dishes. So my time schedule and how much time I have free is a little bit different. One of the dudes I was in the band with, one night he hits me up, he's like, hey, check this out, I made this. And I was like, okay, cool. And it's like this kind of trancey kind of song. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. What'd you make this on? He's like, oh, Fruity Loops. And I was like, oh, okay. At that time, I was pretty knowledgeable on how to get, pirated software and things of that sort, because I'm young, I can't afford, no expensive programs or nothing like that. I've been messing around with Photoshop and 3D Studio Max. I was downloading everything and anything I can. I was very vested into learning as much as I can on the computer all the time. So time goes on. My brother Michael, at the time, he's like, yo, I've been making these beats on this program called Fruity Loops. And I'm just like, okay, cool. At the time, I used to like to skateboard, and in my head, I thought to myself, well, if I like to skateboard and I start making beats, I'm gonna be just like Pharrell, and I don't want to be like anybody else. And that made me feel some kind of way, and I kind of stayed away from it for a while, even though I knew deep down inside it's something that I wanted to do. But I was so afraid of being judged for trying to be like somebody else that kept me away. And that was one of the very first things I learned in music early on is, even if you try to be like somebody else, it's gonna be like your own rendition of that. It's very hard to be exactly like somebody else. They say there's nothing new under the sun, that art, is just recycled material that just constantly gets recycled. And I think that's true. When I was in college, my first laptop was a Mac, and at the time, the first software I could get my hands on was Reason. And I learned Reason, and then time went on, and then I moved on to Logic, and then time went on, and then I moved on to Ableton and Pro Tools. At this time, I was working pretty normal jobs at design firms, and I was studying graphic design and web design, and in my head, that's what I wanted to do, but I knew deep down inside, I had a passion for music. So I was working my full-time job during the day, and I was coming home late at night and, learning how to use these programs and learning how to play piano and taking my experience in playing drums and trying to, translate that into a beat or into something digital. I think a big part of me, a big thing that led me into getting into music production was that, I had all these ideas in my head, and I said, well, if I learn how to use these programs, I don't need nobody else. I can just express myself however I want to, and I don't have to wait to get a ride to go to band practice. I don't have to wait for the guitarist to write the part. I don't have to wait for the bassist. I don't have to wait for nobody. I could just do it on my time when I wanted to. So I had a little small setup in my parents' basement, in the super damp, moldy basement with some Altec Lansing speakers and my PowerBook G4 and a mic up in the corner with dirty ass blankets hanging and things like that. Even then, up until that time, I was still listening to a lot of different kinds of music. By then, I was listening to rock a little bit less. I was very much more into listening like hip hop, crunk music, reggaeton, things that had a much more urban edge. During that time, a lot of my friends were DJs. I was so, invested in digital production that I didn't see myself really becoming a DJ. I was so obsessed with learning how to perfect that and do that I just didn't, I said, cool, you guys are DJs? Cool, I'll be the producer. That's how I kind of saw us, moving along. And, more time went by, I slowly made a transition into doing music full time. A lot of people ask me how do you get to doing music full time? And I tell everyone, it definitely does not happen overnight. It was a process and a transition that took almost 10 years because, music equipment is very expensive and you have to do things to support yourself at the same time. So it's really considered like a very expensive hobby in the beginning, and it's not for the faint of heart. It takes many, many, many hours of, learning the craft and the ins and outs. And I always tell everyone, don't feel so overwhelmed, because when you first, have like a real strong liking for something, you want to know like everything overnight, and that's just impossible. And I tell everyone, just take your time with it, take a little bit every day, and over time, you're gonna get better at it. You're gonna get better at it, and you're gonna learn much more. So to kind of sum it up and jump to where I'm at now, I was working a 9-to-5 job at a company called Pure Red. I was a graphic designer and a web designer there. I was getting paid pretty well, and a friend of mine, he said, "Hey man, this artist is looking for a DJ to go on tour with, and we thought about you." And at the time, I was like, "Man, I'm not really a DJ. I know how to do things live and keep things in time and launch samples and things like that." But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just try to wing it and go for it. I talked to a lot of people in my company. They were like, you know what? If we were you, we would do the same thing. So I put in my 2 weeks notice, and I went on tour with a country hip hop artist called Demon Jones. And I went on 3 tours with him across the entire United States, excluding Hawaii and Alaska. So if you think about my background, I'm listening to Latin music, I'm listening to rock music, I'm listening to hip hop music, I'm listening to electronic music, I'm listening to country music. So over all these years, I'm really building up like this internal database of like, what sounds good, what sounds bad, what's similar, what's not. And I think that is a big part that has to do with the success I have today, from being able to DJ in a lot of different places, doing my own events, being able to do production for a lot of different people, whether it's hip hop or it's electronic music remixes or it's house. This also has to do with me starting my house music side project. I just have such a strong love for music that I want to be involved in as much of it as I can, because I feel like I understand a lot of it, and that's just what makes me happy. After I came back from this tour with this artist, a coworker of mine was nice enough to sell me his setup that he was not using. And that was my time to really dig deep and practice at home and really perfect my skills. I was still taking a lot of studio clients, engineering, and I was still making beats and selling beats and doing all that. But now, I added the DJ part to it. So that kind of helped things come full circle. I didn't have many gigs when I started. A lot of people see me DJing a lot of different places now, and they think, man, like, how do you do it? How do you get so many gigs? How do you stay, so booked and consistent? And I said, easy, man. There was a time where I wasn't. And every time I went out to DJ, I took it very serious, and I was very critical on myself. And I took mental notes every time I went out to DJ on things that I did wrong. No matter if it was, 500 people in the room or if there was 5 people in the room. I was very critical upon myself, and every time I went home, I made sure I wouldn't commit those errors again when I would DJ, because some DJs, don't really like DJing to empty crowds. Of course, nobody likes that. Everyone hates like a boring party. But what I tell a lot of DJs that are starting out is that, look, man, those empty rooms is where you become the best you. It's easy to DJ to a giant crowd of people. Everybody moves, the energy is flowing, it's easy. But if you can DJ to 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, you're gonna be a monster when you get in front of a big crowd. So I always tell up and coming DJs that, find yourself a small room that doesn't have that many people. Go to a restaurant, bar, lounge, whatever, and be like, hey, make them an offer. Be like, I'll come DJ here every week or every weekend for such and such, and really use that time to really, level up. That's like, for a DJ, that's like going to the gym, and, I'm thankful enough now to be, booked every week, 3 to 5 times a week, every week. And I've been lucky enough to have one of the biggest Latin parties in the city as well, which is Perreo 404, which is Perreo 404, which is a Latin party that's based off the idea of the house parties that I would go to in New York and New Jersey when I was younger, where people would just show up, bring a burned CD of music, and just dance all night. No problems, No issues, no fights, no nothing. Just a good vibe the whole night. And we've been pretty successful at doing that. When it comes to studio work, it also has not been easy for me. At the beginning, there was a lot that I had to learn. And, I've even been kicked out of sessions before. I'll tell you guys a story. One time, I'm not going to mention any studios or any artists, but, I was in the studio a lot where there was like a decent amount of traffic of, some pretty popular names. So, I made my contacts, but I wasn't ever a really like very pushy guy on situations like, oh, let me do this or let me do that, or you should tell this person this. I was always very smooth, just kind of hang out, do my thing, and let kind of, life take its course. And when the time is right, I'll be there. So I get a call. They're like, hey, do you want to come do the session? It's for such and such artist. It's a pretty big artist and beat maker at the time. So boom, I go to the session. I start setting up. It's a very nice studio. They have these giant touchscreen monitors and all this fancy stuff and all this fancy gear. And the artist shows up, and we get to recording. And he's like, look, man, before we even get started, he's like, look, man, I record very quick. Once I start recording, I'm gonna just do it bar for bar. And when I lay a bar down, just bring it back and just record again and keep punching them in. And I was like, cool. At the time, I consider myself, one of the fastest engineers in the city. So as I get going, we start recording, like I feel the computer kind of like hiccuping and like freezing and lagging, like just like not allowing me to move as quick as I'm normally used to moving. So he's getting kind of frustrated. I'm getting kind of frustrated. And I think what happened was at the time there was, a lot of pirated plugins on the computer, and the computer was like at the latest operating system, and some of the software that was on there was not fully compatible with that computer yet. So it's kind of like, all those years of me pirating software came back to bite me in the ass in this one session. But, long story short, I got kicked out of that session. At that time, I was very sure of my skills, but I got kicked out. Again, in another session, I got called to do another famous click. They're like, yo, we need an engineer. I was like, cool, I'll show up. I'm very confident in myself. I show up, I start recording. As I start recording, I hear the vocals sound kind of distorted. I'm like, man, what the fuck is going on? So I'm checking my plugins, I'm checking everything, everything looks good. And, in my head, I'm hoping they would not notice and I could just kind of keep going, but they noticed and they're like, yo, what's going on? I'm just like, man, I don't know. I was like, the artist is too loud. That's what I thought it was at the time. He said, the artist is too loud. I'm just like, man, I don't know. So long story short, again, boom, they cut me off from that session. I come back to the same studio a couple days later, and I'm checking the mic, and I see that one of the cables was like trapped and wedged between the mic stand that was choking the cable, which was causing the vocals to distort. So fast forward to now, we're in 2021, and late 2020, I got my first plaque for Digital Radio Tracker, #1 song on all independent streaming radio stations, and I was the engineer. So in saying that, had I not gone through those bad situations, I would have not been where I am now. And, to the point of receiving my first plaque, having my first successful party, and being consistently booked here in Atlanta and starting to get out-of-state bookings. All those years of, mistakes and failures and mistakes and failures, and investing in myself and investing in equipment is what led me to now. Rarely does anything happen overnight. And I tell people all the time, you can always look back and say, damn, I wish I had this, I wish I had that, I wish I would have done that different. But then I feel like the story to your life would be much different. You would not you would not be where you are now. Maybe you would be somewhere different or worse. I feel like, we need to take those punches in the face to level up to get where we are now. And to sum it all up, I think, touching on what I said before, you just need to go ahead and put your time in. You got to understand that, everybody is different. Some people get famous in their 20s and some don't get famous until their 60s or 70s. We're all different. Nobody's the same. It might take you 10, 20 years to perfect your craft. It might take somebody 1 year, but you can't keep looking to the sides You gotta always keep looking forward on where it is you want to get to. My name is JJ, Elias Fatillas, and Velcro. This is Studio Stories.